Shabbat Shalom, everyone. It's great to see all of you. Welcome to Ahavat Shalom. Pleasure to have you share Shabbat with all of us, those in here, those in cyberspace back home. I'm Rabbi Matt Berger, and special treat, I'm joined on the bima with our soloist, Michelle Koningsberg, and Joy Katz-Guthrie down on the keys right below the bima. We're going to begin our Shabbat prayers on page 14, or you can follow along on the screen. The words of Or Zarua Lat Tzaddik, that light is sown for the righteous, radiance for the upright. Words of Psalm 97, part of the Kabbalat Shabbat, welcoming Shabbat liturgy. 3, 4. Zarua la tzadiku ish belev simcha. Or zarua la tzadiku ish belev simcha. Simechu tzadikim b'Adonai, b'Adonai, v'hodu l'zecher kodsho, l'zecher kodsho. Or zarua la tzadiku We'll continue singing Light These Lights.
Oh, hear my prayer, I sing to you. Be gracious to the ones I love, and bless them with goodness and mercy and peace. Oh, hear my prayer to you. Let us light these lights and see the way to you, and let us say Amen. Let us light these lights and see the way to you, and let us say Amen.
If you turn to page 2 in your prayer books, you'll find the words to the blessing for the lighting of the Shabbat candles.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam
Jewish tradition teaches us that we're supposed to recite 100 blessings a day, which is a really big number, may even seem close to impossible. But if we stop throughout the day to express our gratitude and our wonder, we might find ourselves reciting even more. There are blessings for just about everything in Judaism, among others. Even Tevye told us that. And that includes how we celebrate and commemorate LGBTQ Pride Month. Like Abraham and like Sarah, we need to open the doors of our tents wide to embrace all of our brothers and sisters. Let us remember that although everyone is different, each of us share the same spark of God's holiness. And whenever and wherever we meet, we have the ability to share these sparks of kindness, sparks of compassion, and sparks of growth. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam mishaneh habriot, which translates to, praised are you, Adonai our God, who rules the universe by diversifying creation. We'll continue with a traditional Shabbat song, Shalom Aleichem, peace be to you, speaking to the Malachim messengers in our lives that you'll find on 24.
Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hasharet, Malachei Elyon, Mi Melech, Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Boruchim L'Shalom, Malachei HaShalom, Malachei Elyon, Mi Melech, Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Baruch Hu Ni L'Shalom, Malachei HaShalom, Malachei Elyon, Mi Melech, Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Zeichem L'Shalom, Malachei HaShalom, Malachei Elyon, Mi Melech, Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
We'll continue making our way toward Shema and its blessings by chanting the half or Chatzi Kaddish on page 26.
Yirkada v'yirkada Shemei Rabbah, V'yalma divrach yirutei, v'yamlich malchutei, B'chayechon uvyom echon, uv'chayecho beit Yisrael, Bagala, bagala, uvizman kariv, v'yamiru, Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabbah Mivarach Le'alam U'almei Almaya Yitbarach Yitbarach V'yishtabach Vid Pa'ar, vid Romam, vid Nase, vid Hadar, vid Hale, vid Halal, Shemei de Kudesha Brichu, Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, Tushbichata v'nechemata, Damiran bi'alma, v'yemiru. Amen.
Let's rise for the call to prayer, the words of the Baruch Hu on page 28. We'll sing Lai Lai Lai. Yai Lai Lai Lai, Yai Lai Lai Lai, Yai Lai 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 Lai, Yai Lai Lai Lai, Yai Lai Lai Lai, Yai Lai 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 Lai. Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Le'olam va'ed. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Le'olam va'ed. Yai lai lai lai, yai lai lai lai, yai lai 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 lai, yai lai lai lai, yai lai lai lai, yai lai lai lai. Let's continue reading together the words of Ma'ariv Aravim, page 31. Praise to you, Adonai, our God, from whom the evening flows. Your wisdom sets the way on which time and season glide. Your breath guides the sail of the stars. Creator of the tide of time and light, you guide the current of day into night. As heaven spans to infinity, you set its course for eternity. Praise to you, Adonai, our God, from whom the evening flows. Baruch atah Adonai, Ha'ma'ariv Aravim. Wisdom and wonder, as you taught Torah to those whose names I bear, teach me Torah too. Its mystery beckons, yet I struggle with its truth. You meant Torah for me, did you mean the struggle for me too? Don't let me struggle alone. Help me to understand, to be wise, to listen, to know. Lead me into the mystery. Baruch atah Adonai Ohev Amo Yisrael. Continue with open up our eyes, followed by our words of faith, the Shema.
Open up our eyes, teach us how to live. Fill our hearts with joy and all the love you have to give. Gather us in peace as you lead us to your name, and we will know that you are one. And we will know that you are one. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai
Baruch Shem Kivod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed. 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 Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Feel free to be seated. And let's continue chanting the words of the Shema. You shall love Adonai your God with all your heart, with all your mind, and with all your strength. Page 36 in the prayer book. V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha v'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha uv'chol me'odecha v'hayu hadvarim ha'eleh asher anochi mitzavcha hayom al levavecha v'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam v'shivtecha b'veitecha uvlechtecha v'derech ושוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אדוני אלוהיכם אמת. Let's read together, preparing for the words of Mi Chamocha, words of freedom, on page 39. Standing on the parted shores of history, we still believe what we are taught. Forever we stood at Sinai's foot. That wherever we go is eternally Egypt. That there is a better place, a promised land. That the winding way to that promise passes through the wilderness. That there is no way to get from here to there except by joining hands, marching together.
Yai lai 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 lai. Yai lai 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 lai. Yai lai 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 lai. Yai lai 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 lai. Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi chamocha nedar b'kodesh, Norah tehilot osef eleh, Norah tehilot osef eleh. Malechutecha ra'u banecha, bokei hayam lifnei Moshe u'Miriam, Ze'elianu ve'amru, Ze'elianu ve'amiru, Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed, Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed.
Thus it is said, Adonai redeemed Jacob from a hand stronger than his own. Praised are you, Adonai, for redeeming Israel. Baruch atah Adonai, Ga'al Yisrael. Let's continue on page 42, the words of Hashkivenu. Many times in addition to the evening prayer, During weekdays and Shabbat, people will say this prayer along with the Shema before they go to sleep because it speaks of shelter and protection.
Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu L'Shalom Ve'hamidenu Shomreinu L'Chaim.
Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu L'Shalom Ve'hamidenu Shomreinu L'Chaim. Ushmor Seitenu Uvoenu L'chaim u'shalom me'ata ve'ad olam.
Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu L'Shalom
Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu L'Shalom Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu L'Shalom Hamidenu Shomreinu L'Chaim Hamidenu Shomreinu L'Chaim Hamidenu Shomreinu L'Chaim. Blessed are you, Adonai, guardian of Israel, whose shelter of peace is spread over us, over all your people Israel, and over Jerusalem. Baruch atah Adonai, haporei sukkot shalom, aleinu ve'al kol amo Yisrael, ve'al Yerushalayim. Let's rise now for our standing prayers, the words of the Tefillah, which begin on page 46. God, open our lips, and continue on even pages, prayers for the merit of our ancestors, for strength, and for life and holiness.
Adonai sifatai tita ufiya kitehilatecha. Eternal God, open my lips that my mouth may declare your glory. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Ve'Elohei Avotenu V'Imotenu Elohei Avraham Elohei Yitzchak Ve'Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah Elohei Rivka Elohei Rachel Ve'Elohei Leah Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor Ve'Hanora El Elyon Gomer Chasadim Tovim V'Koneh HaKol V'Zocher Chasdei Avot V'Imahot Umevi Gula Livnei V'Nehem L'man Shemo B'Ahava Melech Ozer U'Moshia U'Magen Baruch atah Adonai, Magen Avraham, Ve'ezrat Sarah. Atah Gibor Leolam Adonai, Mechayeh HaKol, Atah Rav Lehoshia, Morid Hatal, Mechalchel Chayim Bechesed, Mechayeh HaKol Berachamim Rabim, Somech Noflim Ve'Rofeh Cholim, Umatir Asurim, Umekayem Emunato Lishenei Afar, Michamocha Ba'al Kivurot, Umido Melach, Melech Memit, Umechayeh, ומצמיח ישועה, בנאמן אתה להחיות הכל. ברוך אתה אדוני, מחיה הכל.
אתה קדוש ושמך קדוש, וקדושים בכל יום יעלוך סלה. ברוך אתה אדוני, האל הקדוש. Feel free to be seated, and we'll continue with the Emsaot, the blessings in the middle of the tefillah. First, with a blessing for the holiness of Shabbat on page 55. Baruch atah Adonai Mekadesh HaShabbat. And then on page 56, letting our eyes behold God's loving return to Zion. Blessed are you, Adonai, whose presence returns to Zion. Baruch atah Adonai HaMachazir Shechinato L'Tzion. And for gratitude, words of Hoda'ah on 59. Baruch atah Adonai Hatov Shimcha Uchana'eh Lechodot. For everything that we're grateful for, we offer thanks. And finally, our prayer for peace is Shalom Rav, found on page 60. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha, grant abundant peace to Israel, your people forever. For you're the sovereign God of all peace. May it be pleasing to you to bless your people Israel in every season and moment with your peace. Blessed are you, Adonai, who blesses your people Israel with peace. Baruch atah Adonai, hamvarech et amo Yisrael, b'shalom. We'll take a few moments for our own thoughts and prayers. Then if you'd like to follow along, Michelle and I will be singing Yehilu L'Ratzon, found on page 62. May the one who makes peace in the heavens and the words of our mouths and meditations of our heart always be acceptable to God, our rock and redeemer. Yehilu L'Ratzon, Imre fi, Egyon libi lefanecha, Yehilu L'Ratzon, Imre fi, Egyon libi lefanecha, Adonai Tzuri, Adonai Tzuri, Adonai Tzuri, Begoali. Adonai Tzuri, Adonai Tzuri, Adonai Tzuri, Begoali. Yehilu L'Ratzon, Imre fi, Egyon libi lefanecha. Yehilu L'Ratzon, Imre fi, Egyon libi lefanecha. Adonai Tzuri, Adonai Tzuri, Adonai Tzuri, Begoali. Adonai Tzuri, Adonai Tzuri, Adonai Tzuri, Begoali. Let's continue now with a prayer for healing, the words of Misha Berach, which you can find on page 253. And of course, many of our thoughts are turned towards South Florida as we hope and pray that more will be recovered from the building collapse in Miami. And along with all those who are injured and all those who are feeling ill due to the pandemic, we add the following names for support and healing. So we remember Laura Barnett, Charlie Burke, Marcy Bunn, Lisa Cargile, Eddie Deerfield, Matthew Deinhardt, Shirley Dravish, Edie Ekber, Evelyn Edelman, Heather Felser, Harry Fleisch, Denise Freifeld, Leah Gottlieb, Paul Landis, Denise Letellier, Arthur Maller, Ray Mancari, Arthur Miller, William Miller, Stephanie Ross, Nicole Rubin, and Jeff Stark. These names, if you have the names of any loved ones or friends who are in need of healing, feel free to recite their names. Something familiar, something peculiar, something for everyone, a comedy tonight. Something appealing, something appalling, something for everyone, a comedy tonight. That song, that's the opening song of one of my favorite movies. A funny thing happened on the way to the Forum. And for sure, it was a pretty good comedy, which is precisely what you can happen if you put together Zero Mostel, Phil Silvers, and Buster Keaton, whether it's in a stage musical or, in this case, a film from 1966. Set in the city of Rome during the reign of Emperor Nero, who probably was a far better guy than history lays him out to be, the story is centered around Pseudolus, and I quote, the lyingest, cheatingest, sloppiest slave in all of Rome, whose only wish is to buy his freedom from his master's parents. It's a farce, of course, but it seems to be a fairly accurate description of life in ancient Rome. It was wild, it was messy, it was restless, and most importantly, very colorful. Come to think of it, it most likely resembles life in biblical times, at least in towns or cities as well, apart from the chorus line and the closing song at the end. I was thinking about Zero and Company when looking at this week's Torah portion, Balak. It's a pretty wild story. A Moabite prophet named Balaam is hired by the king, whose name is Balak, to curse the Israelites. But Balaam refuses to do his job, saying, only God can curse. Yet while Balaam claims to know the will of God, he's got some challenges with more mundane manners, like getting his transportation, in this case a she-donkey, to do his bidding. To be fair, this donkey is a bit special. It talks, and it sees what Balaam, the prophet for hire, can't see: an angel standing before it with a drawn sword. The donkey tries to move away, but instead he gets pinned in a line in a vineyard against a fence, and he crushes Balaam's foot in the process. Incensed, the prophet for hire takes out his frustration on the animal, which is not so good. But when God opens the donkey's mouth, when opens Balaam's eyes to see the angel that the donkey saw, and speaks through the mouth of the donkey, he understands that it was really God who was blocking his path. So it's just like Zero sang: something familiar, something peculiar, something for everyone, a comedy tonight. The result of all this is Balaam goes rogue. The donkey moves on, and the two arrive at the Israelite camp. But instead of cursing the Jews, Balaam blesses them. And it's a good one, so much so that it's still part of every morning service and featured prominently at the entrances of many synagogues throughout the world, and sometimes even in the sanctuary. Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov, mishkenotecha Yisrael. How great are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places, O Israel. Now, after hearing this turn of events, Balak, the king of Moab, as you might recall, is now enraged. We can only imagine the review that he gave on Google for Balaam's prophecy services. The use of comedy in Jewish storytelling is nothing new. In fact, it's a pretty good tool for sharing the teachings of our tradition. The Torah introduces us to a range of colorful characters, men, women, angels, even animals, to infuse our foundational stories with wit and wisdom. Some are appealing, some we may think are appalling, but they're always quite colorful. There's a lot to like about this blessing that Balaam gave to the Israelites. It's nice when people say good things about us. And to be sure, the Israelite prophets never held back when sharing God's displeasure with the Jews. So we should take this good PR about Israel as a win, because between you and me, it's a whole lot better than what many anti-Semites are saying about Israel right about now. There's another interesting feature of Balaam's prophecy that's worth a look. Something that you can only see if you take out the Torah scroll, open it up, and look at it. Because in a handwritten Torah scroll, there are blocks of Hebrew text written in black ink and white open spaces right in between. Some of the breaks are found at the end of a verse. This is called a petucha, or an opening. Others are found right in the middle of a line of text. This is called a stuma, or a closing. And the largest breaks of the text are found between each of the 5 books of Torah. Now, there's a long-standing tradition about preserving these open spaces and breaks in the text. Sopherim, who are trained scribes, follow them very, very closely. It can be compared to a piece of music. Just as the melody takes center stage, the periods of rest or silence can also be very important, because the rest, too, communicate meaning. When it comes to Torah, both the letters and the open spaces can give us clues to how we should interpret it. And this is where the prophecy of Balaam is unique, because unlike most columns of Hebrew in a Torah scroll, which have openings and closings, the text of Balaam's prophecy, which is 3 chapters in total, that's a whole lot of text, doesn't have a single break or open space. So why is this section of Torah different from any other? Because when all of the other prophets speak in the Torah, there are spaces in between the text. The Chofetz Chaim, who was a 19th century rabbi, he picked up on this. And he said the breaks that are found in prophecy, they give us breathing room. They let us process what we're hearing or reading. Prophets aren't just mouthpieces, rather, they have to understand the prophecy and be changed by it. This understanding of a prophet's role might be different from what we are taught. I know from an early age, I was taught that prophets only share the word of God. But here, the Chofetz Chaim, that's not his given name, but it's a moniker, he's saying that prophets are active participants in the message that they share, and that the message that God sends needs to touch their lives in a significant way as well. Just think of all the times that prophets like Moses had dialogues with God, following in the footsteps of Abraham and Sarah. Later prophets like Ezekiel and Isaiah also followed a similar pattern of talking with God. In this way, we can understand the breaks or open spaces in these sections of Torah and the Bible as opportunities for reflection, not only for the prophets, but also for ourselves. According to this interpretation, Balaam wasn't allowed any time to reflect on God's words. He was solely a messenger. In other words, he wasn't touched by what God said to him. Even so, his words matter. Not only because Balaam was pretty well known as a sorcerer, and his prophecies were really spot on, but because if Balaam cursed Israel, the surrounding nations might have gained the courage to go to battle with the Israelites on the strength of his curses. The breaks or open spaces in the text of Torah tell us that we need to find moments in our lives to stop, to breathe, and to reflect. We should take time now and then to slow down and savor what life has to offer, to focus on the blessings that we do have rather than on the things we might not have. There's one final note that I'd like to share about the Hebrew text found in this week's reading. It begins with a bit of trivia. In every Torah that's written by a scribe, there's a pattern. The first Hebrew letter found at the top of every single column, and there's a lot of columns in a 5-book Torah, start with the letter Vav, which means and. And when you look closely at the orthography, like how the letter is written, it's kind of a stick, and then, if you're looking this way, a stick, and then a little hook at the top, and that's what makes a Vav. This, according to the late Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, is what every column is meant to convey, meaning the message of what's in that particular column. And he teaches the entire Torah is linked or hooked up. And it shows us that all 5 of the books of Torah are a single unit given as a gift to us for all time. Now, of course, whenever there's a rule, there's going to be exceptions. So it is with Balaam's blessing to the Israelites. In fact, it's only one of 5 times in the Torah that the top of a Hebrew column of Torah doesn't begin with the Hebrew letter Vav. And it's far and away the most memorable. How great are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places, O Israel. So that means there's probably a special hook or a special headline found in this message. And here it is. The prayer that we call Ma Tovu, or how good, makes reference to both Jacob and Israel. Now, usually when Jacob, which is Yaakov in Hebrew, it refers to a single person, a single individual. And when Israel or Yisrael is mentioned, it refers to a group of people, usually the entire nation of Israel. And this headline, special in Balaam's prophecy, speaks to something really beautiful in Jewish tradition. It's the fact that we can practice it anywhere. The ohel, or tent, that Balaam speaks of in his blessing represents Jacob, which is the single Jewish home. Yet at the same time, it also speaks of Israel, represented by the entire group, or in our case, the synagogue or congregation, a second home and a place where we can feel welcome, a sanctuary. Whenever we hear this blessing, whenever we chant the special words of Ma Tovu, we're saying that the headline or hook of Judaism is the home, our actual home or our spiritual home. It's crucial to the survival of the Jewish people, every one of our personal families, as well as our congregational family. So there it is, something familiar, something peculiar, something for everyone, a sermon for tonight. We'll continue with the words of Aleinu found on page 282. Let's rise as the ark is opened.
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצא בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, בגורלנו ככל המונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא. ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד.
You're free to be seated. You'll find the words to the Mourner's Kaddish, words of praise, on page 294. As we call to mind and to heart families who are in the period of Shloshim, the first 30 days of mourning their loved one. This time we remember especially Lorraine Spicer, sister of Suzanne Pincus, Sandy Sella Smith, friend of Esther Klein, Rich Ulrich, friend of Shelley and Jeff Katz, Doug Myers, friends of Thomas and Dorsey Rose, Elaine Lapin, wife of Bob Lapin, Andrew Shapiro, cousin of Marjorie Graff, Ken Hoffman, friend of Tom and Darcy Rose, and David Curtis, husband of Carol Curtis. To these names we also add the yahrzeit, anniversary of passing of a loved one, for the following individuals on this Shabbat, as we remember B. Samuel Berman, Sadie Bronstein, Al Bronstein, Saul Buckstein, Elizabeth Donaldson, Jane Elbaum, Ethel Guerin, Jenny Gold, Meredith Hamill, Dennis Herman, Jack Itzkowitz, Dalbert Levine, Henny Levy, Clara Markowitz, Elsa Milhouse, Rose Namath, Jacqueline Nemzow, Misha Rabinovitz, Alan G. Rubens, Stanley Silverstein, Mark Werboff, and Annie Winslow. Are there any other names to add for Yahrzeit at this time? We also think of those who have recently passed away due to the tragedy in Miami, as well as all those who are suffering and ultimately died due to COVID. Let's rise now for the words of Kaddish praise found on 294. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah, b'alma divrach hirutei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayichon uv'yomechon uv'chayei dekol beit Yisrael, v'agalau v'zman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shmei rabbah mivarach le'alam u'lamei al-maya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei dekudisha v'rihu. La'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, ta'amiran bi'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Osei shalom b'mromav, hu ya'asei shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. May the one who causes peace in the heavens cause peace to descend on us, Israel, and throughout the world, to which we say, Amen.
V'imru, 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 amen. V'imru, 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 amen.
Feel free to be seated. You'll find the words to the Shabbat Kiddush on the screen or on page 5 in your prayer book, Mishkan Tefillah, dwelling place of prayer. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu b'shabbat kodsho b'yava uvratzon hinkilanu zikaro l'maseh b'reishit ki hu yom tehillah l'mikra'e kodesh zecher letziat mitzrayim ibanu v'acharta v'yotanu kidashta mikol ha'amim v'shabbat kodshecha b'yava uvratzon hinchaltanu. Baruch atah Adonai mekadesh ha-shabbat. Amen. I am to life. Join us in the Motzi, giving thanks for bread. Amen. lechem min haaretz. We give thanks to God for bread. Our voices rise in song together as our joyful prayer is said. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen. Just a couple brief announcements before our closing song. Many thanks to Michelle and to Joy for the beautiful music they shared with all of us, as well as our tech crew right at the back of the sanctuary for helping with the streaming as well as the slides. Thank you so much. In response to the tragedy of the Miami building collapse, our Social Action Committee, upon the advice of the Jewish Federation, calls upon all of us to donate directly to the Shul of Bar Harbor in Surfside, Florida, where a number of members are injured and still not yet found. We sent out an email to the entire congregation late this afternoon, which has a direct link to their Chesed or Kindness Fund. You can also use a donation link right on our temple homepage, and that also has information if you'd like to mail a check as well. So keep them in your hearts, and please feel free to give generously for those affected in Miami. Our closing song will be found on 338, Am Yisrael Chai. It was a nice message that Balaam shared with the Jews and the Israelites back then, and it's still a great message that we can share today, that the people of Israel lives. You'll find the words on page 338 or right on the screen. Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai. 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 O Davinu Chai, O Davinu Chai. O Davinu, O Davinu, O Davinu Chai. O Davinu Chai, O Davinu Chai, O Davinu, O Davinu, O Davinu Chai. Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael 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 Chai. O Davinu Chai, O Davinu Chai, O Davinu, O Davinu, O Davinu Chai, O Davinu Chai, O Davinu Chai, O Davinu, O Davinu, O Davinu Chai. And our prayer for health and well-being, the importance of wearing a mask if you still need to. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, aksher kichanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al shmirat hanefesh. It's always important to follow Jewish tradition and its mitzvah, its sacred obligation to protect life, our own and the life of those around us. Thanks so much for joining us. Shabbat shalom to all of you.